All is ready. This time she will be perfect. Fritz! Throw the switch!
My name is Carl.
What? But you look just like Fritz.
We were very loosely related, but only by marriage.
Okay, Carl, throw the switch if you would be so kind. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another Halloween horror movie review. So today we talk about 1935's The Bride of Frankenstein. Yes, the first of many sequels that would form the original cinematic universe, essentially. So prior to this, Universal had just kind of been doing different movies about different monsters, but this time around they decided to go into sequel territory and adapt some more of the story from the original book of Frankenstein. But again, twisting and turning and altering things slightly. But still, pretty cool to get a continuation of the story, and it is a proper sequel in that it literally picks up right where the first one left off. So it once again stars Boris Karloff, credited as Karloff, as the monster. Colin Clive returns as Dr. Henry Frankenstein, and it is once again directed by James Whale. And Dwight Fry, who we saw in the previous film as the hunchbacked assistant Fritz, now plays Carl, who I think is Fritz's brother or something. It's just basically any excuse to bring Dwight Fry back. I'm all for it. That man, I tell you, Dwight Fry was an actor who really just never got the roles he truly deserved. I mean, he was such a great actor, and his characters, especially in these movies, were so memorable and so beloved. But he never really kind of broke out of that. After a few sort of major supporting characters in the early monster movies, he was relegated more to bit parts and such, which is a real shame because the dude had some serious acting chops. Just the way it goes sometimes, I guess. Anyway, The Bride of Frankenstein, today on the Multimedia Chronicles. Welcome back. So the movie actually opens with a friendly gathering of three people who we quickly learn is Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and Mary Shelley, all sitting around talking and having a grand old time. And Lord Byron and Percy Shelley are talking about how they were really quite taken by Mary's story about Frankenstein. And he says, well, I created that as a morality tale about, not messing with the powers of life and death and defying God and things like that. But there's more to the story, which of course there is, because they didn't adapt the entire book in the first one. Interesting side note, Elsa Lanchester, who plays Mary Shelley, also plays the bride. So The Bride of Frankenstein opens right where Frankenstein left off, with the mob of angry villagers gathered around the burning windmill. Now, this is a slightly alternate look at it, because this time we actually get to meet a lot of the villagers watching. Sort of the big standout one would be a character named Minnie, played by the wonderful Una O'Connor. Universal monster movie fans will of course recognize her as the innkeeper's wife from The Invisible Man. She was very good at playing very high-strung, excitable, slightly hoity-toity characters, but always fun. Just an absolute delight, and she really just chews up the scenery whenever she's on, whether it's a supporting character or what, doesn't matter. She had quite a unique screen presence. So one of the villagers watching is Hans, Maria's father, Maria being the little girl who drowned in the first one. Played by a different actor, though, so I didn't realize that was the same character immediately. And also Hans's wife is there. We didn't know that he had a wife in the first one. She never appeared in the first one. But so he's watching, and he's very happy that the monster is being burned to death, but he wants to be sure that he's dead. He wants to see the monster's bones. So as the fire's dying out, he goes to examine the rubble and ends up falling into a pit with a pool of water in the bottom. And the monster is in the pool of water. He has survived the fire at the mill. And he immediately strangles Hans. And then Hans's wife goes to check on him, and the monster pulls her in too and kills her. And then he climbs out of the pit and encounters Minnie. And Minnie just kind of swoons and screams and runs away, but she doesn't get killed. She manages to survive. Meanwhile, Henry Frankenstein has been taken back to his ancestral castle home and is on the mend. He's starting to get better. He's quite injured from his final confrontation with the monster, but he is getting better. Minnie shows up and is just freaking out, saying, "The monster's alive!" But nobody's really believing her. It's like, well, whatever, the monster's not alive. I mean, he burned to death in the mill. So Henry is on the mend. He's basically renounced the monster and all of that, but still feels that he has it within himself to unlock the powers of life and immortality, and wants to continue experimenting in some way. Elizabeth has sort of I don't know, you call it a psychic flash or what have you, says that if he continues to pursue that, she sees death coming. And no sooner does she say that than Dr. Septimus Pretorius shows up, who happens to be Henry's former mentor. No mention of him in the previous one either. He's basically a new invention. So up to this point, absolutely nothing that we've seen on screen happens anywhere in the book. Dr. Pretorius is entirely an invention of the movies. He's not in the book anywhere. Frankenstein's only real mentor was Dr. Waldman in the book. And there was another professor who was just kind of a jerk to him, but Dr. Waldman was the one that really taught him a lot of what he knew. So in this case, Dr. Pretorius is, I guess, another mentor of his, who himself has been doing some experiments with creating life, and he wants to show Henry what he's come up with. He invites Henry back to his place to show him his own experiments in life, and what he's created is what are called homunculi. Essentially, they're tiny little people. And I have to say, the special effects in this sequence with the miniature people are fantastic. They are completely convincing that there's these little tiny people running around on the table in front of Pretorius. It's really phenomenally well done. So he's got all these little ones. He's got like a king and a queen and a couple other ones I don't remember. But anyway, there's a whole bunch of them, and he shows them, and it's so strange. And again, not from the book at all. This is entirely an invention of the movie. It's so unusual because up to this point, the tone of the movie has been relatively dark. And these little people sort of provide this lighthearted moment just kind of in the middle of all of this darkness. It just seems very strange. In showing Henry that he's created these things, basically proves to him that, yes, I can create life too, although it's a little bit different than what you were doing. But I think if we put our heads together, we could really come up with something. So the monster's roaming the countryside meanwhile, and he encounters a young shepherdess who falls into a lake and is drowning. Now, it's kind of interesting that they do this because it's almost like a repentance for what happened in the first movie with Maria. So the monster goes into the water, hauls the girl out, and saves her life, basically saves her from drowning. And she sees him, she wakes up, she sees him and screams. And he's like, no, he's trying to calm her down. Meanwhile, two hunters hear the screams and come by and see the monster and shoot at him. The monster ends up being chased, captured, hauled off, and chained up. So he gets chained up, put in a cell. People are like looking down the window and like laughing at him and being general jerks to him. A guard comes in and goes to light I forget if it was a cigar or a pipe, or he goes to have a smoke anyway. So he lights a match, and the monster's like, and then the guard is just a jerk basically, and he's like, oh, you don't like this? You don't like the fire? And he's like sticking it in his face, and the monster like freaks and pulls off all his chains, kills the guard, and escapes. So he ends up it's like, wow, you had him chained up for all of 2 minutes. Good job. So the monster's free again. He's roaming the countryside. He encounters a sort of abandoned gypsy encampment, or the gypsies are just away for the moment, and finds some food in the fire. He ends up burning himself in the fire, and he runs away. But then he hears this music, a violin playing Ave Maria. So he follows the sound, Maria again. He follows the sound of the violin, again, like kind of trying to pluck the notes out of the air, and he traces it to a small cottage, and the music stops, and it's an old man in the cottage, and he's just kind of praying for, he's lonely, and he's just praying for a friend, just somebody to spend some time with. The monster goes into the cottage, and of course the old man is blind, can't see him, so he doesn't immediately recoil in terror, but he invites him in, and he feeds him, and they talk, and you get the impression that there's a passage of time. They actually spend quite some time together, possibly weeks, possibly months even. As they're spending this time, the old man actually teaches the monster to speak. Just a few rudimentary words like good, bad, friend, things like that. But they become very good friends. It's a very sweet relationship. Now this, I should say, is actually a pretty significant nod to a pretty significant part of the story in the book. Now in the book, the blind man is in it, but he's, remember how I mentioned the character of Fritz in the book? How there's a young man and his sister living with an old blind man? Yeah, well that's clearly what this is a nod to. Now in the book, he befriends the old man while the kids are out, and then when they come back, they see him and they're horrified, and everything just kind of goes south from there. But in this one, so he's hanging with the old man, and he teaches him that fire is not bad, fire is our friend, fire is good, you just have to know how to use it. So he teaches the monster how to enjoy a cigar, and then as they're just sitting having a pleasant time together, two hunters enter the cottage, and they come in. One of which, by the way, is a young John Carradine in just a bit part here. They come in, and of course they see the monster, and it's like, what are you doing? It's like, this is the monster that's been terrorizing the countryside. He's like, no, he's nice. We've been spending so much time together. He's like, no, you're in danger. The monster just kind of freaks out, and the hunters attack him, and he attacks the hunters, and ends up accidentally burning down the old man's cottage. It like, knocks over the fire and everything, and it's just, horribly tragic, because they had such a sweet friendship, and finally the monster had found somebody who just accepted him and was willing to spend time with him and teach him something that Henry never did. Henry just abandoned him and shunned him, but this old man was giving him something that he never had before, not just a friend, but a mentor as well. So he learned so much from that old blind man. So the creature flees once more, and this time finds himself ultimately in a crypt. And in the crypt, he runs into Dr. Pretorius. So Dr. Pretorius is there, I guess gathering body parts and whatnot, but he, again, does not flee in terror from the monster. He actually invites him over, and he's having some food, and he talks to the monster and explains to him what his idea is. He says, well, how would you like to have a companion like you? And he's like, yes, like me. And the monster has a conversation with him. He's still very, it's very simple words and phrases, but they have a conversation. And Pretorius, tells him that, we'll go and talk to Frankenstein, and we'll see if he's going to be willing to help. Now this is where things vary, because in the book the monster actually approaches Victor and says that he wants Victor to create a mate for him, someone like him who's deformed and reviled by humanity, but who will accept him as one of its own. And Victor initially agrees. He makes a deal with the monster, says, okay, I'll create a mate for you, and then the monster says, if you do this for me, we'll leave. We'll go north, we'll just live out in the wilderness, and you'll never see or hear from us again. But in the book, as Victor is creating the creature, again, working entirely on his own, this is strictly between him and the monster, as he's creating the bride, he realizes that, well, what if it rejects him? What if it doesn't want anything to do with him? What if it's pure evil? What if it's even worse than the monster is? So he ends up destroying what he has created, and the monster vows revenge because he's like, well, you've denied me happiness, you've denied me my peace, you owe me this because you abandoned me, and there's like this whole big thing. So that's when the monster essentially vows revenge on Victor. It's like, you've denied me my mate, you denied me my happiness, you abandoned me, so my only recourse now is revenge, to make your life miserable in the way that you made my life miserable. And that's when the monster begins its quest for revenge against Victor Frankenstein. So in this case, the end game is essentially the same, where they're creating a mate for the monster to bring it peace, and so that it'll be more controllable, I guess. But the circumstances are considerably different. So they go off to Frankenstein, and this is where it's kind of similar to what happened in the book, but from a slightly different perspective, mainly because Pretorius is involved. So Pretorius goes to meet Frankenstein with the monster and tells him what his plan is. It's like, well, we'll create him a mate, a friend, to be with, and then they'll leave. So it's much like in the book, except in this case it's Pretorius presenting the bargain, and then the monster is there kind of as the muscle backing it up. So Henry refuses, and Pretorius is like, okay, and he motions for the monster to go, and does kind of a hand gesture, which the monster indicates understanding. Monster goes off, kidnaps Elizabeth. So basically they're holding Elizabeth hostage until Henry agrees to help. So, long and the short of it is, Henry does agree to help. Pretorius designs the brain. Henry designs the body, again, from bits and pieces of other, fresh cadavers. And they create the female monster. Bring it to life, he exclaims, "She's alive! She's alive!" So, nice little nod to the first one. And as Victor in the book feared, we see that fear realized in this case. Now, in the book, the bride is never brought to life, so this is one pretty big variation. So the bride is brought to life in this one, and, as Victor in the book feared, rejects the monster. She's just as terrified of him as anybody else, and doesn't want to have anything to do with him. So the monster basically concludes that the only course left to him is to bring peace is death. So he lets Henry and Elizabeth escape, says, "You live, we stay dead," and keeps Pretorius there. He won't let Pretorius escape. So the monster and the bride kind of almost like hisses approval, like, yeah, we should be dead. And it's very morbid when you kind of look at it in a certain perspective, and then kind of break down the reactions. Pretorius, of course, is horrified. The bride is like, whatever, let's just all die. And the monster is just like, you guys escape, we're going to stay dead. He overloads the machine, and the whole lab just blows up, and the entire castle just crumbles into the ground. And that's the end. So that's The Bride of Frankenstein. Now, a lot of people have said that they consider this to be the superior of the two films, and I can easily see why. On a purely technical level, I mean, it's beautifully shot. There's just some wonderful, wonderful shots in this, and the use of black and white, the high contrast, deep blacks and blazing whites and gray areas, and it's just beautiful to look at. The sets are fantastic. The cast is fantastic. Ernest Thesiger as Dr. Pretorius is wonderfully sinister, but in that charming way, kind of like he's the bad guy you'd like to sort of hang out with and just have a nice conversation with over dinner. Colin Clive, wonderful as always. Boris Karloff, amazing as always. Elsa Lanchester, oh my God, was she beautiful. So beautiful. And that look, the look of the bride, again, has become almost a trope, where the Bride of Frankenstein in any iteration is always seen with the big hair and the electric white streak, and yeah, just fantastic. Dwight Frye, by the way, Carl dies. He never survives. He never survives. He dies as Renfield, died as Fritz, and died again as Carl. So the monster kills Carl when it's around the time that they're bringing the bride to life anyway. So he almost survives to the end, but not quite. So a few little behind-the-scenes tidbits. This one, unlike the first one, was actually shot entirely in the studio. There was no location filming whatsoever. The musical score, yes, they actually have a full musical score in this one, unlike the first one, was actually reused in the Flash Gordon movie serial starring Buster Crabbe. So if you're watching the Flash Gordon serials and the music sounds a little familiar, well, now you know why, because it's literally the score from The Bride of Frankenstein. Who knew? Boris Karloff was actually against the idea of the monster speaking. I guess he felt it was better as a mute character, even though it's, a speaking character in the book. But he was overruled, obviously, and because he had to do actual dialogue, he actually left his bridge work in. So you may notice his cheek is nice and full in this one, and that's because the monster does indeed speak. So he, I guess, needs all his teeth to speak, so makes sense. The little girl who played Maria in the first one actually has an uncredited cameo as the sort of leader of a group of young girls that the monster encounters as he's running away from the blind man's burning house. Bela Lugosi was originally considered for the role of Dr. Pretorius, but for some reason they didn't get him. Elsa Lanchester said that she based a lot of her spitting, hissing, kind of bird-like performance as the bride on the swans in Regent's Park in London. She said they were just vile, nasty creatures, so that was her inspiration. Jack Pierce, always being attentive to detail, slightly modified the monster makeup so that it reflected the fact that the monster had been in the windmill fire. Yeah, so gave him like some burns and singed his hair off a little bit and stuff like that. So, very nice. So, needless to say, being such a huge classic, there's been a lot written about the making of this film. So if you want to dig a little deeper into it, well, there's some nice extras on the Blu-rays here. But there's also quite a lot of stuff online. There's a lot of books that have been written about it. There's just so much information about the making of this movie. I could go on for hours and hours and hours recounting it all to you. But I just thought I'd give you a few little choice tidbits. So, yeah. So what are my thoughts on it? Well, honestly, I really enjoyed it a lot. Oh, I should mention, apparently there was an epilogue that was originally planned, also featuring Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and Mary Shelley, but for whatever reason they decided not to bother with it. They just kind of ended it where they ended it. I don't know. It would have been a nice kind of bookend, I guess, but not necessary, really. Anyway, I like it a lot. I mean, I've always really enjoyed The Bride of Frankenstein. I think it's got a lot of interesting things, especially having read the book now. I can see where all the little nods are. There's even a line from Elizabeth early on about a feeling that she should beware her wedding night. And that's a clear nod to the book, because when Victor went back on his promise to create a mate for the monster promises him, he says, "I will be there on your wedding night. I will be with you on your wedding night." And that's when he kills Elizabeth in the book. Now in this one we have a slightly happier ending where both Victor and Elizabeth, or not Victor, Henry and Elizabeth survive, but it goes to some pretty dark places in the book by comparison. So so lots of nods to the book. Nice to see the bride story added to. Honestly, that part of it is not a massive part of the book, but it's nice to see that part of the story was kind of taken and expanded upon in such an entertaining way. I mean, just, again, despite the differences, as a film, this is pure entertainment. As I said, it's beautiful to look at, it's got a fantastic cast, and it's just a really fun story with some, pretty spooky parts, obviously tame by today's standards, but you can definitely see why it was such a hit back in the day, and why it endures as such a classic today. Alrighty, that is it from me to you for now. So we'll see you in the next one, whatever it happens to be. So big thanks to you for watching. Big thanks to my Patreon sponsors. And until next time, sayonara. Bye.